kind of pursued, like the University of Iowa has a bookbinding program, and then they rolled it into an MFA. So I did get accepted to the MFA, but decided to just go my own route. So with my independent education, that's where I started pulling together multispectral imaging, and I'll kind of talk a little bit how I transitioned from conservation to that. And also a lot of conservation and bookbinding studies. Like Renat Mesmer is the head paper conservator at the Shakespeare Folger Library. Jeff Peachy is a huge independent conservator out of New York. He does a lot of heavy work for the New York Public Library and other museums, and I've also done like parchment making. So I really wanted to learn everything that there was about making a book. So I am a bookbinder, and I have a whole bookbinding lab or studio that's just in storage. And then I got into multispectral imaging. So a lot of my freelance imaging, because I trained so much, and I trained with the University of Hamburg up here, they are able to do a lot. So their whole program is funded by the German government, and so they do a lot of contractual work for other universities based on grants. So they often get way overloaded with image processing that's needed. So they kick a lot of their, after the image capture is done, a lot of their universities and stuff will come to me if they need more detailed image processing, because all Hamburg can really do is batch processing. And so a lot of these things you need more detail at. And I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of lingo, and I know I haven't given you a lot of background for it. Whoa, wait, hold on, this got, oh, well, maybe not. Okay, so this is how I got into image processing. So this is when I was in my graduate program at the University of Iowa. A couple came in with this telegram that they had saved, their grandparents had saved, and it had been posted in their living room and sun damaged, so you can no longer see any of the writing here. So this is kind of how I transitioned from book conservation into this. So they brought it into the conservation lab. There was nothing the conservation lab could do, but I had just learned about a program called Retro Reveal. See, one click. There we go. And so with this program called Retro Reveal, it's out of Salt Lake City, and they kind of put it together to do some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it just does a bunch of like algorithm, it's free. So if you're curious, you could just take a picture and they'll run it through their algorithm, but it's not the same as multispectral imaging. But so we were able to recover the text between Retro Reveal and then just some Photoshop. So as you can see here, it's a World War II soldier responding to the news that his wife is pregnant with their child. So this is very important to the family, a very significant artifact for the family that was able to be recovered with imaging technology. The other way I got into this field is what I like about book conservation. I started studying the book as a narrative artifact. So a lot of old books, you can't really read the content, right? It's Latin or it's German, or the content was what I became less interested in. I became much more interested in the artifact as a narrative, because what you have is you have paper makers, you have printers, you have bookbinders, you have readers, you have users. So one of the last classes I took, we got one book for the whole semester. I got this body of geography, which if I ever have the money, I will go buy from the University of Iowa Library, because I loved this book. So one of the things I found when we got to the users section was a lot of these scribblings. So this was on the front. It's badly written, Sarah Gillings. I think that's Bradborough, Scarborough. And so what one of my instructors had told me is that when learning to write, people would do a lot of copying. So the shaky of this hand is this woman looking away at the letters and learning to write her name. And so based on the usage of this book, there was a tear from overuse. Like you can't see in this picture, but this was like a crease tear from being like dog-eared and referenced so much, was Northamptonshire. So I was actually able to find, or who I speculate is this woman, based on the dates in the book. It was a woman named Sarah Julian. Here you can start seeing the name Julian. And I found her in, I forget what's the one the Mormons have, the DNA.
Family search.
Yes. But so this was her whole family in a survey. Here she is, Sarah Julian, age 35. I don't know why she had this book, but or had access to this book. It's possible like she could have been a maid in someone's house and they were teaching her how to read or write, but this was evidence of her learning how to write her name. So that's also kind of how I started getting into this interest of like, what can our materials and artifacts tell us that we can't just know from just looking at it?
specifically on the ages? Were they, like, those were the ages logged, or they passed away at that age, for instance?
No, those were the ages logged when they were taking the survey. Because I think whenever England started surveying their population.
Sure. Okay.
And so if that was the household, she was living with her in-laws and then kids. But yes, at the age of the survey. And then this is just the last thing that got me interested in multispectral imaging. This is a piece of binder's waste, and I put this in the terminology, that's a later slide, so sorry. But for those of you that don't know what binder's waste is, paper and parchment especially before paper was invented, was incredibly labor intensive to make, to write. So you would never just throw away parchment. So a lot of time parchment was reused. Binder's waste means that they have put it inside the lining of a book to help support the structure. So it was like this piece of parchment couldn't be used that much anymore because it had already been like scraped a bunch and reused. So they just put it in binder's waste. So when we took the book apart for conservation purposes, this was under what's called a paste down. It's, you know, the paper you see on the inside of the book boards. So this was just something fun. This was not multispectral imaging. This was just a regular UV light. And you can see with just the UV light, the difference between what it is from the paste down, and then you can start seeing lettering. The other interesting thing too is, you wouldn't know this, but this parchment is made from goat. And the reason I can tell is because it has lots of tiny hair follicles. You can actually tell what animal parchment comes from based on the hair follicle pattern. But so with goat, you get a lot of tiny hair follicles. So the other issue was the tiny hair follicles were making it really hard to see the ink. So putting it under a UV light really brought out the areas where the follicles had blocked the text. So that's kind of how I transitioned. So as I wrapped up my program at the University of Iowa, I reached out to a man named Gregory Hayworth at the Rochester Institute of Technology because he was trying to put together a program. He's a humanist, not an imaging scientist. And so he was trying to put together more of a humanist program from the aspect of like book history mixed with multispectral imaging. So I reached out to him and kind of told him what I was trying to build in my own education. And he was like, yeah, come to Rochester. So that's kind of how I started my training, is just decided to graduate early in December 15, and then just traveled a lot to try and learn it. So some basic terminology. And sorry, maybe should have started with this. But so what is multispectral imaging? Multispectral imaging is using UV, ultraviolet, to infrared wavelengths. And usually you're using just 12 to 16 wavelength bands. You can do a lot more narrow, which is what I just put hyperspectral here to compare. Hyperspectral imaging is used a lot in art conservation and seeing what's underneath other paintings. Multispectral imaging is not good for that. But so a lot of art conservation is using hyperspectral, and that's just, you can see 200 to 500 narrow bands. So the comparison is a lot different. So just know multispectral imaging, MSI, it's those 12 to 16 bands of wavelengths from ultraviolet to infrared. Binder's waste, I kind of just talked about that. It's stuff found inside old books. And then palimpsest, I'm going to mention a lot. Palimpsest is, again, like paper and parchment were very cost and labor intensive to make, so you wouldn't ever just throw it away. Typically, you would scratch off the old ink, and then you would rotate the paper or parchment, usually 90 degrees, and write over it. So that's called the overwriting and the underwriting, and palimpsest kind of means this like layering of the two. So a lot of the items that we're looking at will be palimpsested as well. And then I just wanted to go over real quick reflectance and fluorescence. Reflectance images are, the light bounces off the surface, because when I explain multispectral here in a second, it uses both. And then fluorescence is, the reason we use fluorescence in multispectral imaging is because a lot of medieval inks will fluoresce really well. So even if there's not visible ink, the molecular traces will fluoresce enough to get a good capture as well. So what is multispectral imaging? So it's safety first, just for any conservators, anybody that cares. One of the biggest concerns is that you're putting a bunch of ancient manuscripts in front of a lot of lights, but it's totally safe. It's less than total exposure of just being in a room. So just always like to present that. So image capture is, again, ultraviolet, which is usually 365 wavelength up to infrared. And so the way light generally works, I think a lot of us might know this, but our eyes see like the reflectance of the light. So even though the apple has, gets all the light waves from white light, what's reflected is the red, and what our eye sees is the red. So multispectral imaging is similar, where the camera is the eye, and then the sensor is kind of like the brain interpreting that. So what we do with multispectral imaging is we take pictures of the artifact with one wavelength at a time. And so remember, we're doing multispectral, so we're just doing 12 to 16, not 200 to 500. So while it does take a long time, we're doing one capture per wavelength, and then and then we're adding that together. So real quick, this is what the system looks like. This is a Megavision system. These are called the main bank LED panels. So this has got all of your lights from from low blues to infrared. And then these here are dispersion panels. So they help when the LEDs go on, they really help like disperse the light over the artifact. There's the little document right there. UV lights are separate, or a separate panel. Raking lights kind of put it at an angle so you can really see the texture of the artifact. This comes in really handy if you have deep impressions from an ink or like a block print or something like that. And then transmissive light is, I unfortunately haven't gotten to do any image processing where transmissive light is helpful, but it does shine it from the bottom up, so you can kind of also see areas where there's no ink left, but maybe like a groove, like the parchment or paper will be thinner there, so the transmissive light, if there's no ink left over for any reflectance or fluorescence, transmissive will help kind of fill out the missing content. So this is the University of Hamburg's Megavision system. So this is then, they borrowed this from RIT, or archive is what they call it. Excuse me. So this is what the system, the Megavision system captures, is we have all of our wavelengths from ultraviolet to infrared, and each time you do a capture of one page, just one page, you're getting 16 LED bands in the reflection, and then you're running with just these fluorescent bands, the low blues and UV, but you're adding a filter wheel. So this means it's blocking the blue, blocking the green light, blocking the orange, blocking the red, UV pass, and then UV block. So it's giving you, like you're taking these 4 color wavelengths repeatedly, and then you're kind of like mixing it up here. So that gives you a total, if you don't use the transmissive bands, of 40 images. And let me go back really quick, because the reason this system is special is because this camera right here is a specialty crafted lens that allows UV light to pass through. So most cameras, the lenses will block UV light. So this is a special made light just for this. This is why the Megavision camera was like $100,000. And it's special that it was going to be donated to Colorado, because it's a specialty made lens. And the guy that makes the lens won't work with the other company, which is Phase One, which is more popular in libraries. But so again, let's go back to this. So once you get these images, you get, so again, one image per wavelength and then per filter that's on there. So you're getting a total of 40 images per page. And then what we do with it, what I do then with the image processing, because I don't have a system yet, is we take, so all of these images get loaded into a software. Right now what I use is a proprietary GIS software called Envy. And Envy just happens to be based in Colorado. So that was the other really fortunate part when we were talking about bringing MSI to Colorado. I presented on this to Envy, and I got several of the developers to get really interested in trying to make better software, or make Envy be more compatible with image processing, because Envy is just used for like satellite images of the Earth. This was just kind of co-opted by the professors at Rochester Institute of Technology to do image processing. So the way this works is that we get all the, so of course we have like 44 or 40 images, right? Not just these 5. but you put them in the software and it makes what's called a cube. And so a cube is, kind of a three-dimensional shape. And then you pick out what are called ROIs, or regions of interest. So say I find an area where there's faded text and I wanted to look at, tell me about this area. So then I highlight, I forgot I have that. So I highlight regions of interest, and I usually actually do I do 3, because if you do more than 3, it gets crazy. So that's something that, and ultimately, I daydream about making more of this process automated, because it takes almost like a day to do one image, just because of processing time. But this part can't be automated, because you really have to have a user identify, this is the text we want, let's do this area that looks interesting, and you just have to have an eye to find the area. So the concept is you put it in a cube, and the region of interest, statistically then, you run a statistic process, and I can mention that later, but it's probably not interesting. You can ask questions about it if you're interested. But so what the statistical process does is it takes that one area and it draws through the x-axis, right? So that's why you need a cube. So then it's looking at this one area through the x-axis. It takes the statistics then from that and it applies it to the whole image. So that then changes what the image, when you get back the results, hold on, the math is on this page. Okay, here's the math. So basically what happens, first you have to calibrate your cubes. So I take all the reflectance, I build a cube, I calibrate it. Same with the fluorescence, I build a cube, I calibrate it, identify my regions of interest, and then you run 6 statistical processes. There's a package that I run, and there's other ones to run if it's really difficult, or a palimpsest, it's really hard to get stuff out of. But so you run 6 processes for each ROI, and then you get back with that, just that base level of processing is 792 images. So all of those images look different than the original because it's the output of those 6 statistical processes. It's kind of hard to explain that part. But so then I go through those images and I save off the ones that are really strong, where I could really see the text, and then I combine all those, and then I just kind of mix them up to find an RGB. So this is called, right here, is the result that you get. So this is called pseudo-color. So it's not the normal RGB coloration that you get with an image. But when you layer images together in the red, green, blue fields, and they're different images from the statistical output, then you get these pseudo-colors. And then I actually send them to my assistant, Mitch, who then puts them into Photoshop and then further fixes them up. So the abstract colors aren't so abstract, and then that final package is what goes back to the scholar. So again, this is what you see with your eye, and then this is after the image processing, the final product that goes to the scholar. So this is a Manichaeistic manuscript. Manichaeism was a religion that predates Christianity. It has dualism. St. Peter was supposed to be a Manichaeist before he became a Christian. So this came out of the Chester Beatty Library. The University of Hamburg imaged it, and then there's, I think, 2 professors, one at University of Iowa and one at University of Sydney, that are studying Manichaeism. So I've been processing these images in 2 or 3 separate packages so they could start reading the ancient Greek. So it takes them a while.
Aramaic.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, there you go. Aramaic. But it does take a while, and you can see, there's always missing stuff. And that's cool that you just know that from just looking at it.
Family historians.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so I don't know. Sorry, maybe that didn't explain it very well. Does anybody have questions about what multispectral imaging is? Actually, I could stop here.
It's cool.
Yep.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yep.
So the idea is, everything kind of started with the Archimedes palimpsest. It was purchased from auction in 1998 by a very wealthy person who has always remained anonymous, but the rumor is it's Bezos. But true to the NDA, the people that worked on it have never actually confirmed that rumor. So they started then processing it in 2002 with just UV. Oh, sorry. And so to kind of explain this, I'm sorry, I put a 15-minute TED Talk in this presentation because Will Knoll here was the lead. He was at the museum that the buyer took it to do conservation and imaging. So he actually gave this 15-minute TED Talk that I think explains it really well. I thought this would be sooner in, so do we have time for a 15-minute TED Talk in here?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll let Will know. He's actually since passed away, which is really too bad, because he was, his idea that he talks about at the end, just kind of try to remember that, because that'll take us to, when we get to the end of this presentation, the plan for Colorado. So I'm going to turn this on. Will know.
The great texts of the ancient world don't survive to us in their original form. They survive because medieval scribes copied them and copied them and copied them. And so it is with Archimedes, the great Greek mathematician. Everything we know about Archimedes as a mathematician, we know about because of just 3 books, and they're called A, B, and C. And A was lost by an Italian humanist in 1564, and B was last heard of in the Pope's library about 100 miles north of Rome in Viterbo in 1311. Now, Codex C was only discovered in 1906, and it landed on my desk in Baltimore on the 19th of January, 1999. And this is Codex C here. Now, Codex C is actually buried in this book. It's buried treasure, because this book is actually a prayer book. It was finished by a guy called Johannes Myronas on the 14th of April, 1229. And to make his prayer book, he used parchment. But he didn't use new parchment. He used parchment recycled from earlier manuscripts, and there were 7 of them. And Archimedes' Codex C was just one of those 7. He took apart the Archimedes manuscript and the other 7 manuscripts. He erased all of their texts, and then he cut the sheets down in the middle, he shuffled them up, and he rotated them 90 degrees, and he wrote prayers on top of these books. And essentially, these 7 manuscripts disappeared for 700 years, and we have a prayer book. The prayer book was discovered by this guy, Johann Ludwig Heiberg, in 1906, and with just a magnifying glass, he transcribed as much of the text as he could. And the thing is that he found 2 texts in this manuscript that were unique texts. They weren't in A and B at all. They were completely new texts by Archimedes, and they were called the Method and the Stomachion. And it became a world-famous manuscript. Now, it should be clear by now that this book is in bad condition. It got in worse condition in the 20th century, after Heiberg saw it. Forgeries were painted over it, and it suffered very badly from mold. This book is the definition of a write-off. It's the sort of book that you thought would be in an institution. But it's not in an institution. It was bought by a private owner in 1998. Why did he buy this book? Because he wanted to make that which was fragile safe. He wanted to make that which was unique ubiquitous. He wanted to make that which was expensive free. And he wanted to do this as a matter of principle, because not many people are really going to read Archimedes in ancient Greek, but they should have the chance to do it. So he gathered around himself the friends of Archimedes, and he promised to pay for all the work. And it was an expensive job, but actually it wouldn't be as much as you think, because these people, they didn't come for money. They came from Archimedes, and they came from all sorts of different backgrounds. They came from particle physics, they came from classical philology, they came from book conservation, they came from ancient mathematics, they came from data management, they came from scientific imaging and program management, and they got together to work on this manuscript. The first problem was a conservation problem, and this is the sort of thing that we had to deal with. There was glue on the spine of the book, and if you look at this photograph carefully, in the bottom half of this is rather brown, and that glue is hide glue. Now, if you're a conservator, you can take off this glue reasonably easily. The top half is Elmer's wood glue. It's polyvinyl acetate emulsion that doesn't dissolve in water once it's dry, and it's much tougher than the parchment that it was written on. And so before we could start imaging Archimedes, we had to take this book apart. So it took 4 years to take apart, and this is a rare action shot, ladies and gentlemen. Another thing is that we had to get rid of all the wax because this was used in the liturgical services of the Greek Orthodox Church, and they'd used candle wax, and the candle wax was dirty, and we couldn't image through the wax. So very carefully, we had to mechanically scrape off all the wax. It's hard to tell you exactly how bad this condition of this book is, but it came out in little bits very often. And normally in a book, you wouldn't worry about the little bits, but these little bits might contain unique Archimedes text. So tiny fragments we actually managed to put back in the right place. Then, having done that, we started to image the manuscript, and we imaged the manuscript in 14 different wavebands of light. Because if you look at something in different wavebands of light, you see different things. And here is an image of a page imaged in 14 different wavebands of light. But none of them worked. So what we did was we processed the images together, and we put 2 images into one blank screen. And here are 2 different images of the Archimedes manuscript. And the image on the left is a normal red image, and the image on the right is an ultraviolet image. And in the image on the right, you might be able to see some of the Archimedes writing. If you merge them together into one digital canvas, the parchment is bright in both images, and it comes out bright. The prayer book is dark in both images, and it comes out dark. The Archimedes text is dark in one image and bright in another, and it'll come out dark but red, and then you can start to read it rather clearly. And that's what it looks like. Now, that's a before and after image, but you don't read the image on the screen like that. You zoom in, and you zoom in, and you zoom in, and you zoom in, and you can just read it now. If you process the same 2 images in a different way, you can actually get rid of the prayer book text. And this is terribly important because the diagrams in the manuscript are the unique source for the diagrams that Archimedes drew in the sand in the 4th century BC. And there they are, I can give them to you. With this kind of imaging, this kind of infrared, ultraviolet, and visible light imaging, we were never going to image through the gold ground forgeries. How were we going to do that? Well, we took the manuscript and we decided to image it in X-ray fluorescence imaging. So an X-ray comes in the diagram on the left, and it knocks out an electron from the inner shell of an atom. And that electron disappears. And as it disappears, an electron from a shell further out jumps in and takes its place. And when it takes its place, it sheds electromagnetic radiation. It sheds an X-ray. And this X-ray is specific in its wavelength to the atom that it hits. And what we wanted to get was the iron, because the ink was written in iron. And if we can map where this X-ray that comes out, where it comes from, we can map all the iron on the page, and theoretically, we can read the image. The thing is that you need a very powerful light source to do this, so we took it to the Stanford Synchrotron Radiation Laboratory in California, which is a particle accelerator. Electrons go round one way, positrons go round the other, they meet in the middle, and they create subatomic particles like the charm quark and the tau lepton. Now, we weren't actually going to put Archimedes in that beam, but as the electrons go round at the speed of light, they shed X-rays, and this is the most powerful light source in the solar system. This is called synchrotron radiation, and it's normally used to look at things like proteins and that sort of thing, but we wanted to look at atoms, at iron atoms, so that we could read the page from before and after. And lo and behold, we found that we could do it. It took about 17 minutes to do a single page. So, what did we discover? Well, one of the unique texts in Archimedes is called the Stomachion, and this didn't exist in codices A and B. And we knew that it involved this square, and this is a perfect square, and it's divided into 14 bits. But no one knew what Archimedes was doing with these 14 bits, and now we think we know. He was trying to work out how many ways you can recombine those 14 bits and still make a perfect square. Anyone want to guess the answer? Okay, it's 17,152 divided into 536 families. And the important point about this is that it's the earliest study in combinatorics in mathematics, and combinatorics is a wonderful and interesting branch of mathematics. The really astonishing thing, though, about this manuscript is that we looked at the other manuscripts that the palimpsester had made, the scribe had made his book out of, and one of them was a manuscript containing text by Hyperides. Now, Hyperides was an Athenian orator from the 4th century BC. He was an exact contemporary of Demosthenes. And in 338 BC, he and Demosthenes together decided that they wanted to stand up to the military might of Philip of Macedon. So Athens and Thebes went out to fight Philip of Macedon. This was a bad idea because Philip of Macedon had a son called Alexander the Great, and they lost the Battle of Chaeronea. Alexander the Great went on to conquer the known world. Hyperides found himself on trial for treason. And this is the speech that he gave when he was on trial. And it's a great speech. Best of all, he says, is to win. But if you can't win, then you should fight for a noble cause, because then you'll be remembered. Consider the Spartans. They've won innumerable victories, but no one remembers what they are because they were all fought for selfish ends. The one battle that the Spartans fought that everybody remembers is the Battle of Thermopylae, where they were butchered to a man, but fought for the freedom of Greece. It was such a great speech that the Athenian law courts let him off. He lived for another 10 years. Then the Macedonian faction caught up with him. They cut out his tongue in mockery of his oratory, and no one knows what they did with his body. So this is the discovery of a lost voice from antiquity, speaking to us, not from the grave, because his grave doesn't exist, but from the Athenian law courts. Now, I should say at this point that normally when you're looking at medieval manuscripts that have been scraped off, you don't find unique texts. And to find 2 in one manuscript is really something. To find 3 is completely weird, and we found 3. Aristotle's Categories is one of the foundational texts of Western philosophy, and we found a 3rd century AD commentary on it, possibly by Galen and probably by Porphyry. Now, all this data that we collected, all the images, all the raw images, all the transcriptions that we made and that sort of thing, have been put online under a Creative Commons license for anyone to use for any commercial purpose. Why did the owner of the manuscript do this? He did this because he understands data as well as books. Now, the thing to do with books, if you want to ensure their long-term utility, is to hide them away in closets and let very few people look at them. The thing to do with data, if you want it to survive, is to let it out and have everybody have it with as little control on that data as possible. And that's what he did. And institutions can learn from this, because institutions at the moment confine their data with copyright restrictions and that sort of thing. And if you want to look at medieval manuscripts on the web, at the moment you have to go to the National Library of Y's site or the University Library of X's site, which is about the most boring way in which you can deal with digital data. What you want to do is to aggregate it all together, because the web of ancient manuscripts of the future isn't going to be built by institutions. It's going to be built by users, by people who get this data together, by people who want to aggregate all sorts of maps from wherever they come from, all sorts of medieval romances from wherever they come from, people who just want to curate their own glorious selection of beautiful things. And that is the future of the web, and it's an attractive and beautiful future if only we can make it happen. Now, we at the Walters Art Museum have followed this example, and we have put up all our manuscripts on the web for people to enjoy, all the raw data, all the descriptions, all the metadata, under a Creative Commons license. Now, the Walters Art Museum is a small museum and it has beautiful manuscripts, but the data is fantastic. And the result of this is that if you do a Google search on images right now and you type in illuminated manuscript Quran, for example, 24 of the 28 images you'll find come from my institution. Now, let's think about this for a minute. What's in it for the institution? There are all sorts of things that are in it for the institution. You can talk about the humanities and that sort of thing, but let's talk about selfish things. Because what's really in it for the institution is this. Now, why do people go to the Louvre? They go to see the Mona Lisa. Why do they go to see the Mona Lisa? Because they already know what she looks like. And they know what she looks like because they've seen pictures of her absolutely everywhere. Now, there is no need for these restrictions at all, and I think that institutions should stand up and release all their data under unrestricted licenses, and it would be a great benefit to everybody. Why don't we just let everybody have access to this data and curate their own collection of ancient knowledge and wonderful and beautiful things, and increase the beauty and the cultural significance of the internet? Thank you very much indeed.
That was Will Knoll. He was part of the Archimedes Palimpsest was kind of the very first project that used multispectral imaging applied to cultural heritage. So this is the original system that they used. This here is Keith Knox. He was in the picture that Will Knoll showed. This was the original system. Instead of LED panels, they had these tubes. This is Keith Knox. He'll come up later. It was a scientist for NASA, I want to say, an imaging scientist for NASA. Anyways, he's in Hawaii now. He wears these Hawaiian shirts for every professional conference ever, all the time. So it's just very endearing. So this system, the next slide, is going to be my favorite. You'll see this system. It's not actually 11 minutes, don't worry.
I need to see the booth diary page.
You saw the page yourself. There is no treasure map on it.
No, it's a Cyperly Intuit treasure map. Did anyone spectral image the page?
No need to. The ink writing on the page is clearly visible.
It could have been erased or faded. You're the director of document conservation. You know all this.
It's not up to me. It's not my department.
That department reports to your department. Come on, Abigail, one look under infrared. You can have the Boston tea tables.
Both of them?
You don't want to actually look at it under infrared. UV would have been better.
I've been looking at this page for hours. There's nothing there.
Ben, I really don't think.
But look, they're using the same system.
Look at it. In 100 years, no one's going to remember anyone involved in the Lincoln assassination besides Booth.
That's not
Look,
true.
look.
Do you know the expression, his name is Mud?
Yes, of course.
You do? Do you know the origin of the expression?
Does anyone but you?
Dr. Samuel Mudd was convicted of being a co-conspirator in the Lincoln assassination. The evidence was circumstantial. He was later pardoned, but it didn't matter. Mudd's name still lives in infamy, and I will not let Thomas Gates' name be Mudd.
Ben,
What?
look at this. See that?
Well, that's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, it says smudge. It's nothing.
Residual ink from the facing page. Flip it. The letters are backwards. It's a cipher.
Yes,
It's
it is.
a cipher. See how the letters are coupled?
Uh-huh.
Plate pair ciphers encode letters in pairs. This could prove his story.
Unless you decode the cipher, this does not prove your theory.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So that's not actually how the software works. You cannot rotate it. It does not look that clean. It's very blocky. But I just thought it was great. Roger said he wrote a little bit of script for them to use terminology. And he's like, I don't know why they didn't use it. It's like, well, because it's an adventure movie. So now let's just go through some of the some of the projects that kind of put multispectral imaging on the map. So one is the Mount Sinai Palimpsest project. This is the Mount Sinai Library is one of the most continuous non-destroyed libraries in the world. So they have a lot of manuscripts. And so again, like most manuscripts, unless they were like the big pristine books and made with fresh parchment, a lot of manuscripts have that underwriting or faded text or palimpsest, also binder's waste. So these are the guys. Again, there's Keith Knox, Mike Toth. He was former CIA and then went into multispectral imaging. So he really partners with Library of Congress now. Ken Boydston, he's the one that does Megavision, the system that builds the Megavision system that was going to donate the camera to Colorado. Mike Phelps runs EMEL, which I'll talk about here in a second. EMEL stands for the Electronic Manuscript, Early Manuscript Electronic Library. They host everything from Mount Sinai. They have one guy, that Damien, who runs image capturing. He's at Sinai all the time. And then Roger Easton, he's a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. So I'm not sure who this guy is, but these guys were pretty key in the Archimedes palimpsest. So then the Sinai project then was kind of the next thing to come out of the Archimedes palimpsest. So they're just pretty much trying to image all of the manuscripts they can. You can see kind of here, the green text, the green text is the original. This cross text, like how much just random manuscripts bits are in there. And this is Father Justin. He's the head of the Mount Sinai Church. So this is him just presenting. You can see the underwriting is this red. That's what's not visible to the eye. So that they're actively, while they're also imaging a lot of the manuscripts at Mount Sinai, they are also actively kind of researching them and studying them. So EMEL, as I said, Early Manuscripts Electronic Library, they have, this kind of goes to the conversation that when I was presenting on this to other institutions, this is one place that has a Megavision system. So when we're talking about the multispectral systems that are in the United States, there's only a handful. EMEL is a US-based company, but their Megavision system is on Mount Sinai forever. So that's, need for the US could use some more systems. Colorado could use one. Another one that's really interesting, Library of Congress imaged the draft of the Declaration of Independence and found that Thomas Jefferson had actually written subjects at one point. Don't spread that information too far, because but basically what they think this is just he was kind of like copying some French philosophy or something, and that got in there. This one is one of my favorites. This is Dr. Livingston's diary. Hold on, I think I have. So what this is Dr. Livingston took field notes, and when he ran out, so he was traveling through Africa, and his guides were unfortunately slave traders. So he was very conflicted about that, and even witnessed, he was very conflicted about that. So he ran out of journal pages, he ran out of ink. He was able to mix his own berry-based ink while he was in the field, and then use newspaper to write it. And then this is an example of the palimpsesting. See, we're doing a 90-degree angle from the original text. So I'll talk about what they found out in just...
Coming up, he was one of the world's greatest explorers and abolitionists.
Dr. Livingston, I presume.
Now, cutting-edge science is revealing his adventures.
And the 28th, 8 villages in flames.
And a far more complicated man.
He had to work with Arab slavers.
The Lost Diary of Dr. Livingston on Secrets of the Dead.
So if you get a chance to find that video, I used to have a link to the video itself, and it is no longer just free online. But PBS has the show Secrets of the Dead. If you get a chance to find it or watch it, it talks all about the imaging and what they found. But clips from that are, so Ken Boydston worked on imaging it, and Keith Knox did the image processing. And so, we can do this. So basically what Keith did is, with the image processing, he was actually able to invert the newspaper text and then overlay that on the image of the newspaper, so the text of the newspaper, the black text, was neutralized with the inverted text, and then get out the berry ink that Livingston had written in. And what they found is that he had witnessed a huge massacre of a village by the people he was traveling with, the slave traders, and was very conflicted. I think he left his tour, he left them after that. But it's a very significant piece of history because it's something that you can't read, and then it tells of a significant massacre of this African village as slave traders ransacked it. This is one that I recently, this is the Manny exhibit, or parchments that I worked on. Fortunately, these were not scratched or overwritten, they were just faded. This link's out, but I won't go to the link. But I did recently go to the Chester Beatty Library Mystery of Manny webpage, and they have my work on there. So that's really fun. Yeah. This is another one that was, this was kind of low key, the processing of it, but this was in the news. It was a Syrian prisoner had been released, and all the prisoners had agreed. They spent their time writing with, they had a piece of cloth, and with blood from their teeth and rust from an iron can, they would write the names of the prisoners. And they had an agreement that whoever first got out would take this piece of cloth with them so that their families would know who they were. So the man that was released, I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but he turned this over, and then Rochester, the Institute of Rochester worked on this, and they were able to get out the names of most of the prisoners. And as you can see, it's very faded because it's just blood from people and then rust from a can. So that was a tricky one that was also pretty historically significant. This one I'm not as familiar with. I just put in because my colleague who recently moved out of Colorado but was here doing MSI and helping build the Colorado MSI, Helen Davies, this was her thesis because she did her thesis in medieval maps but is also now an experienced MSI person. But so this is an old map of written on lamb, and lamb is very fatty, so it deteriorates very easily. So lamb parchment, and you can see all the fading down here. And they were able to uncover like little houses and like riverways and little villages. So that lent itself a lot to like when you look at Vercelli now, and you could see historically where buildings and things used to be. Other projects have been, James Cameron really wanted to find the lost city of Atlanta, so he hired Ken and Greg to do imaging on rock. It was kind of a weird choice because the rock had an etching, but since you're here, who's the guy that wants to LiDAR everything?
Okay, Colorado State?
Yeah, you don't have to go. So that's okay. There's somebody up at Colorado State does LiDAR, which is a total different imaging technology, but he wanted to LiDAR this, I think it's called like the Sistine Chapel of the Amazon. It's rock painting that has grown above the tree line just from shifting. And so I had initially contacted him to see about multispectral imaging on the cliff art, which would be, at the time, had been very difficult because you would need a drone and a very steady shot in a very dark night. But so you can image rock, you just can't image etchings. You can image things that have minerals or colors, even if it's residual and it's not all the way there. This should have gone by, sorry, I got my slides out of order. So this is like just the news on the Syrian prison and the imaging they did around it. This one is the Engedi scroll. This made a big splash when it first came out. The Engedi scroll, I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess this up, but old Jewish houses or temples have like a room, you don't throw away religious artifacts, you like put them in a hole in the wall. Does anybody know what that, is anybody Jewish or knows what that is? Do you know what that is?
I forget the terminology.
Yeah, but there's this little space inside a wall where you don't throw away religious artifacts, just put it in a hole in the wall. So they had uncovered a big one of these, and the scroll was rolled up, as you can see here, and Brent Seals at the University of Kentucky, I can talk about the technology in a second.
Virtual unwrapping begins by acquiring a three-dimensional volumetric scan of the damaged manuscript. This scan produces a set of cross-sectional images that show the internal structure of the scroll. When viewed as a 3D object, one can clearly see the individual layers of the scroll, but any text on the surface of those layers is obscured from view. In order for a readable version of the scroll to be produced, these images must be passed through our virtual unwrapping pipeline. First, we capture the 3D shape of the layers of the scroll in a process called segmentation. On the left side of the screen, the software moves through the scroll, image by image, tracing the shape of a single scroll wrap. On the right, we see the 3D model that this produces. Next, we extract the ink from the data in a process called texturing. Using the 3D shape generated by segmentation, our software makes another pass through the scroll, this time looking for very bright pixels. Bright pixels indicate regions of dense material, in this case, inks made with iron or lead. We now have a single wrap of the scroll with the text shown clearly on its surface. However, because the surface is curved, it's difficult to read all of the text from one viewpoint. The flattening stage of our pipeline converts this textured 3D surface into a flat plane so that the text can be more easily read. To produce the best results, these 3 steps must be performed on one small section of the scroll at a time. As a result, we end up with several texture images that must be merged together. This merging process creates a single consolidated image that shows the full text. Using this pipeline, we have restored and revealed the text of 5 complete wraps of the En-Gedi scroll. The 2 distinct columns of Hebrew writing reveal the scroll to be the book of Leviticus. This marks the En-Gedi scroll as the earliest copy of a Pentateuchal book ever found in a holy ark, a significant discovery in biblical archaeology.
So, I'll go back to, okay. So that was Brent Seals, and I had the chance to meet him at a Rochester conference, and what I thought was really cool is he said the way he got the idea for how to unwrap this was by watching, like, flags waving and, like, Disney Pixar stuff. So just that, it's just really cool how people get the ideas for these stuff. And then this is just a straight up brag, not even a humble brag. He told me that I reminded him of himself at his age, which I choose to take as a compliment because also could have meant like, you know, when he was immature before he got serious. But I'm going to pull the good one out of that. Did you have a, yeah?
Is that the same system that they use for the Herculaneum scrolls?
Yes, thank you. I was going to mention that. Yes. The problem with the Herculaneum scrolls is the writing is charcoal. So this is iron ink. I don't know if you guys, iron gall ink is made from the gall nuts of wasps, but it does have a lot of iron in it, and then depending, everybody had their own recipe. But the Herculaneum is, a lot of it's charcoal on papyrus, and then this is iron on parchment. So it does really matter what your substrate material is and what your writing material is for getting results. Sorry, we'll go through this. Okay. So then this is an overview of the current field real quick. Sorry, I'm going to face a lot of time, but this is the part where I was like, here's the pitch for Colorado. So of the capture systems, like these are the groups and teams that are working in the US. So we've got RIT, which is the Rochester Institute of Technology, specifically the Carlson Center for Imaging Science. I've spent a lot of time up at RIT. They're putting together Archive, which is the Rochester Institute of Cultural Heritage. I forget what the V is. But so that's where they're trying to combine the humanist side of Rochester University with the RIT part. And then that's Greg Hayworth, he's the humanist. Roger is the imaging science guide, so is Dave Messenger. Vanilla France is at the Library of Congress. Bill Christianberry, he does the processing for Mike Toth, who was the former CIA guy that is the Archimedes palimpsest. So they have their own private company where they do a lot of high-tech stuff. But so they're kind of grouped together. And then Kid Boydston runs Megavision. It's his own little business just in a strip mall out in California. I've also visited him to work with him. And he was the one that was going to give us the camera. And then Mike Phelps runs Emil. His imaging technician is Damien. Ken and Damien came to Georgetown on their way to drive a Megavision system to the Museum of the Bible in DC. They came during Christmas market and they loved it. And then our daughter was like 2 at the time, and the hospitality she showed them was by throwing up all over as soon as they walked in. So they did visit our town, they love it. Our house was not as hospitable. So the current systems are the Megavision system and then phase 1. And the reason I'm talking about this is because a lot of libraries use phase 1 for their digitization. It is great for digitizing stuff. It is not as strong with multispectral imaging. And the reason is because you need this really advanced camera lens, like I mentioned earlier, that allows the UV light to pass through. For whatever reason, the guy that makes these lenses, it's a very, very small field of people, doesn't like phase 1 and won't make them the special lens. So still the best system is the Megavision, even though the phase 1 is kind of more out there. The stronger system is the Megavision. So imaging processing software is also something you need. You obviously you can do the capture, but until you can process it, you're not going to get the images that you can read the text on. So I use Envy. It's a very expensive license, but the University of Oxford has been letting me borrow their license because I did processing for them a while ago and they don't know how to use it. They got it just for this. So they're allowing me to use it for other freelance projects. And again, Envy just happens to be here. So as we got more of the programmers involved, they kind of started writing some special codes or systems to make the software stronger. That's really fallen off, again, because COVID derailed a lot. But there's open access software, ImageJ, and then Keith Knox, again, the Hawaiian shirt guy, is creating an open access one. It's just not, it's very, very strong. But the user interface just takes kind of a steeper learning curve, but it's free. So, so you could, if you had something captured, process it yourself. And then when we talk about access, we're talking about access to the images themselves, like how can people get in there and read what has been underneath, what has been hidden for decades or centuries. So UCLA has the Dr. Livingston Field Diary. They also have the Mount Sinai stuff. The Archimedes palimpsest is all, I think it's at, or OPenn, yeah. It was Pennsylvania, it's Penn University. The Jubilee palimpsest, that's out of the University of St. Mary's, Texas. So the point of all of that is all of that stuff is kind of siloed at these individual places. So the idea for Colorado is the future, the barriers are right, the expense of the camera. RIT has actually, Kevin Saka, who lives here, of course, see all the elements are here. He was a student at Rochester Institute of Technology, created a $5,000 camera. Normally, the Megavision system is like $200,000. The camera itself is at $100,000. This is a $5,000 system. We've tested it out here and it works pretty good. And then again, like the open processing software, Hoku. And then some uses, this is also just in there for the conservators, again, when I was presenting to libraries and institutions. You also could use multispectral imaging for conservation purposes because you could see how well an item is doing prior to conservation and then after conservation. So you could actually see if the conserving effects altered the manuscript. So it's just if you're a conservator, which is who I was presenting to a lot. So when we talk about barriers of entry, again, equipment and cost, the image processing, the storage of all of these terabytes of data, I always have to work off of a hard drive, and I have to like clear out my computer before I do any processing because it's really gigabyte heavy. Standards of capture and file naming conventions are also pretty varied. And then access, it's siloed, it's scholar-based, and it's very heavy metadata. When we looked at those UCLA and other things, it's a very heavy metadata. It's not like really user-friendly. So what we wanted to do for our system, for our Colorado program, is we were going to use the RIT, well, initially we were going to get the cool fancy system, but then go to the RIT system, the $5,000 system. We could still probably get a pretty good price on the camera because Ken is still kicking around and happy to be involved. Image processing would focus on the open access Hoku and a lot of online training. And so the idea is that we would create something called DIAM, DIMCHI, which is the Digital Museum of Cultural Heritage Imaging. So we would have this basic repository that would be open access and it would be crowdsourced. So we would go to places like New Orleans to get parish records from the flood. Like places that, like all of the projects have been very Western manuscript heavy because those are what the grants are written for, those are what's at universities, those are what the scholars are writing for. But there's a much greater need and use for multispectral imaging. With History Colorado, we were talking about trying to get some graffiti off of an old train workers, a cabin where they would live, lots of graffiti on that. Again, like social justice stuff. One woman mentioned, I don't remember, at a university, mass graves and identification papers that are no longer legible. So that's kind of what Helen and I had kind of wanted to start pivoting to, was these artifacts that aren't in universities or museums, but are still very important and very relevant, especially to the people who hold them. and then being able to have a repository where, you know, they don't have to have it posted publicly, but if they wanted to, then we could do crowdsourcing to have people kind of transcribe a lot of this writing and give back the history that was lost, things that aren't, you know, 1,000-year-old manuscripts. So anyways, that everything changed with COVID. Yes.
And then you have a platform so it becomes historic. Those
Right.
documents become historic later on.
And then the idea would also be that, like, if you had a project, but it wasn't, you couldn't grant fund it,
Yeah.
this interface would also be kind of like a catalog. You put your project up there and say, this is how much money we need, and you crowdsource the funding. Like, it'd be a catalog of projects that need funding or that need transcribing. So that's kind of when I said, like, listen to what Will Noel is saying about, like, access to data at the end. That was kind of the idea. So anyway, these were the people that were on board with that. We had a lot of momentum. And that's it. So are there any questions? Sorry, I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Yes.
I actually have a plethora of questions and would love to get in contact with you later because the Underhill Museum in Idaho Springs has a collection of supposedly first draft maps of a lot of the mines around here.
Oh.
Because Professor Underhill was a professor at School of Mines, assayer, mineral surveyor, land surveyor, and local cartographer.
Oh, cool.
So they are supposedly his hand-drawn maps that they haven't been open since the 90s. So I would want to get in contact with, you know, how would we best want to open those up?
Yeah. I mean, do you know what kind of ink? Is it on paper?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess it would be on paper, not parchment.
Type of paper, and we don't know exactly what type of ink.
Yeah.
But it was late 1800s, early 1920s.
So it's probably the machine-made paper, which is always really bad too. So if anybody wants to know about the history of paper making, I can tell you right now. Yeah, we could do that. And I mean, so there's still been talk about getting the 5,000 Misha system. I know the Denver Museum, one of the scholars who does maps, Chet Van Duzer, put me in touch with somebody at Denver Museum because they really want to image one of their maps. The problem is there's just not a lot of, Colorado isn't old enough for Colorado-specific stuff. It's mostly like we could do some of that stuff and then host this like national/international repository. But yes, we should totally talk. If you guys need conservation on them, I don't know if I would be the one to do it anymore, but you'd want to, there's conservation you could do to hold the map.
That's also
So it won't fall apart.
So,
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to say thanks for giving your talk. I really enjoyed it. And you talked about two different types, so multispectral, and then there was like another one called hyper. Or something.
Yeah.
That's like a broader range.
Yes.
What would you use that for?
That's mostly used, so it's mostly used by art conservators because you really need the hyperspectral to see underlayers of paintings. So you need much more you need 200 to 500 wavelengths to kind of cut through all the paintings and get enough data because you're still building that cube, but get enough data to see under paintings. Yeah. Yes.
What, so light fast, like when you, okay, so I'll explain light fast real quickly. For instance, like I use watercolors because I'm an artist. Mm-hmm. And when you use super, super light watercolors, you don't want to leave like your finished product or whatever you lay down on your paper under the sun because it will strip the colors. Mm-hmm. Now, is that, now, what does light fast strip? Ultraviolet or infrared? Or what
what makes it what makes it strip?
Yeah, what does it like suck out?
Oh. My guess would be the light fastness is a UV issue if it's in the sunlight.
Okay.
But as far as like this technology goes, there was that safety first slide at the beginning, whereas even the time under UV is not gonna take away the pigment out of that.
Yeah, the pigment. Yeah, exactly.
If you guys want to know about pigments of inks too,
Yeah.
let me know.
I think we need to thank you.
Yeah.
I like people.
Thank you.